day and happy Easter weekend to all of you. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Apostle Paul wrote, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. Jews demand signs, Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified." And why do we preach Christ crucified? I'd like to consider just three aspects of the cross today. First, the necessity of the cross, the tragedy of the cross, and then finally the victory of the cross. In order to secure our salvation, Jesus Christ needed to be crucified. This has been one of the foundational defining doctrines of Christianity from the very beginning. The cross was necessary because in order for Jesus to remove our sin, the guilt of our sin, he needed to take that sin upon himself. He needed to take our place. He needed to take our punishment. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul wrote, "Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us." Now, how did he become a curse for us? He explains that by quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 23. "Cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree." The Old Testament law stated that anyone who was hung on a tree had fallen under God's curse. In submitting to the cross, then, Christ was willingly taking that curse upon himself. This is the substitutionary aspect of Christ's death. So in Gethsemane, when Jesus prayed to the Father, asking if there was any other way, his prayer was met with silence, because there was no other way. There was no other option. There was no plan B. If God's plan to redeem men and women was to be accomplished, Christ needed to be crucified. While the cross was absolutely necessary, it was equally tragic. The entire scene is enveloped with shame and suffering. There's a familiar verse in Philippians chapter 2. He humbled himself, became obedient to death, even the death of a cross. Paul is highlighting that this was the ultimate humiliation. You can only try to imagine how scandalous, terrifying the experience would have been. The sweat, the blood, the spit running down his face, the mocking, the scourging, the beating, the nails. The entire crucifixion process had been designed and perfected as the ultimate torture. In fact, the origin of our English word excruciate actually comes from the Latin out of or from the cross. Though Jesus was fully God, he was not spared any of the agony. But we see the righteous one hanging on that cross, abandoned by his friends, rejected by his people, forsaken by his Father. For 3 hours, darkness covered the land. Jesus was made to be sin, and in so doing, he bore the wrath of God. Jesus was literally God forsaken. But as horrendous as this scene would have been, what appeared to be an utter and total defeat was in fact ultimate triumph. Because in order to defeat death, of course, Jesus first needed to die himself. This would also be the first step in conquering sin and Satan. His victory cry, his final word from the cross, a single word in Greek, but translated into a succinct yet powerful phrase in English. 3 words: "It is finished." That final word was a word of triumph, a word of hope, a word that demonstrates just how far God was willing to go to rescue you and me. A word of assurance that we are the beneficiaries of that victory. Redemption, forgiveness, assurance, acceptance, peace, an eternal inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. But why do we preach Christ crucified? Because the cross was an absolute necessity. And while in many ways tragic, it was the one and only means of victory. May you enjoy the many blessings of the cross this Easter season.